attempt to develop, rather than identifying by office, attempt to develop some criteria that would apply to such quote unquote other officials, such as a high degree of involvement in the conduct of interstate affairs, high degree of representation of the state, carrying out functions on behalf of the state, something on similar lines. But that too does not seem to have been a simple task. And it appears now the Commission is looking at other options, such as application of the special missions regime, both under customary law as well as the 1969 New York Convention on special missions, which would cover other categories. And Sir Michael would also refer to some of the recent jurisprudence in England with regard to this area. So it's important that this question also be addressed through some means. Of course, bearing in mind that an over-expansive interpretation or over-expansive approach to other categories could create an environment of impunity. So either one must have some very clear guidelines or criteria to identify such persons who are closely involved in interstate relations, or satisfy the requirements under the special missions regime. As was mentioned, the Commission is yet to grapple with the very, very difficult issue of are there exceptions to immunity in respect of crimes under international law or grave crimes, which are yet to be defined. Now, as the Commission proceeds its work, as my colleagues mentioned, it is very, very important that member states of Asia and Africa, the legal advisors, follow these developments closely and let the voices of Asia and Africa be heard as international law develops into new frontiers before one finds it is too late to make our contribution or impact into these developments. I will make some very brief observations on the topic of the protection of persons in the event of disasters. There has been, under the special rapporteurship of Mr. Valencia Ospina, considerable progress on this topic, notwithstanding, again, some of the underlying tension surrounding the topic between the notion of protection and the principle, overriding principle of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of the state. In its previous work, the Commission has recognized the importance of the key United Nations Resolution 46/182 on disaster relief, that external disaster relief should only be provided subject to the consent of the of the affected state. But that consent is a qualified consent regime, and the draft article states that such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. Now, it's very important that the commentary clarifies in what circumstances could withholding of consent be considered unreasonable, and some elements were identified. The reaction of member states to the draft articles finalized so far in the Sixth Committee, again, has been a cautious one. The initial response has been that the outcome should be one which comprises non-binding broad principles and guidelines, which preserves the operational flexibility. That is what is required in disaster situations. And that such an approach was likely to be of practical value to states and likely to attract widespread support and acceptance rather than convention with binding obligations. Among the draft articles finalized at the last session, Sir Michael would refer to the principle, the precaution principle that caused some element of controversy within the Commission. The report contains extensive literature on the jurisprudence of the ICJ, of international arbitration, starting from the Corfu Channel case, the Trail Smelter case, ending up with the paper mills case in the ICJ. Draft Article 5 speaks of cooperation for disaster risk reduction. Now, here again, I would refer to the initial reaction of member states when the draft articles were referred to the Sixth Committee. And the reaction of some states was that states need to reflect, and this was also expressed within the Commission, in approaching these draft articles on protection of victims of disasters, that states need to reflect and deepen the discussion on the centrality of the principle of international cooperation and solidarity as the guiding principles as work progresses on the topic, rather than approaching it from the perspective of strict legal rights and duties. Because we had a lot of controversy within the Commission. Is there a duty to seek assistance on the part of the affected state? Is there an international legal duty? Is there a right to provide assistance on the part of the international community? Do you treat states, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations on par? And do you confer rights under international law on these entities on an equal basis? These are very sensitive issues. And some of us took the view, rather than a strict rights and duties approach, why not we approach these articles from that wider perspective of providing relief on the basis of international cooperation and solidarity. Since the Law of the Sea Convention of 1982, the duty to cooperate has been entrenched. One could say it's a principle of customary law. It is there entrenched in the Law of the Sea Convention, duty to cooperate. So these are perspectives which member states must bear in mind. Do we look at this from the perspective of strict rights and duties? How do you preserve the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of the affected state? At the same time, sovereignty connotes the responsibility to protect your own citizens, the human rights considerations. How do you balance these considerations? So this work is very important. The commentaries that are going to come out are important. It requires the closest attention of member states of Asia and Africa who then make their views known, both in writing to the Commission as well as in the deliberations of the Sixth Committee. So I will stop at this point, and I thank you very much for the patience here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rohan Pereira, for giving us your views on two very important subjects on immunity of state officials and also on protection of persons in the event of disasters. At this stage, we have a request for the floor from few states, but I think after such extensive and valuable contributions, we need time to reflect. So we'll have a tea break now, and we'll reassemble in about 20 minutes, and thereafter we'll take interventions from the states on these subjects. So have a nice break.
Good point to break. Sorry? No. I'll touch on some of that.